I use the Elgato Stream Deck constantly for my streams and video editing. If you want to pick one up from my amazing sponsor Elgato, head to the link down in the description below. Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and twice before, brand new Pokemon types were added to the main series Pokemon games at the start of a new generation. Dark and Steel in Gen 2, and Fairy in Gen 6. Since the upcoming Pokemon games, Pokemon Sword and Shield, are the start of a new generation, it is theoretically possible that we could get one or more new types added to those games. Now, whether or not new types should be added is a completely different discussion. While I am an expert in game balancing, I am not an expert in balancing the intricate mechanics of a video game battle system. So this video is just going to be a fun what-if type video that shouldn't be taken too seriously, discussing some possible brand new Pokemon types that could be added in Sword and Shield. The first type is one that you've probably heard discussed somewhere before, that being the Sound type. When I was a very young kid, I actually made a book coming up with my own Pokemon. And no, it's not the one that I discussed in a video several years ago. This book predated that book, and the Pokemon in it were way worse. But in that book, I actually designed several Pokemon that were Sound type Pokemon. Some that specifically come to mind are Speaker Pokemon with arms and boxing gloves that were Sound fighting type Pokemon. But the bottom line is that I've been thinking about the Sound type since I was very young, and I know I'm not the only one. Sound is such a prevalent aspect of life in our universe that it makes sense to be a Pokemon type. In fact, it's probably the most possible of all of the types that we'll discuss in this video because there are so many things already in Pokemon that would make sense as Sound type. For one, there's a ton of Sound type possible moves like Growl, Howl, Boom Burst, Hyper Voice, Perish Song, Roar, and pretty much every single move that Soundproof protects from. The large majority of those moves are normal type moves, so it would be nice for those sound-based moves to get a more interesting type. Additionally, if Sound type was added, then the Soundproof ability could become an immunity ability like Levitate. There are also several Pokemon that could very logically become Sound type. Whismur, Loudred, and Exploud are probably the most obvious, but there are quite a few more, like Chatot, Meloetta, Timpole, Jigglypuff, Noibat, Noivern, and several others. As for type effectiveness, the mechanical engineer in me really wants the Sound types matchups to be based on how well sound waves travel through certain materials. They have set a precedent for this before, making electric strong against water due to how quickly electricity can travel through impure water. If you didn't know, sound is vibrations. It's waves of particles hitting each other, traveling through a certain medium. Sound travels fastest through rigid, solid materials, and it is muffled and travels slower through softer materials or liquids or gases. Therefore, I think it makes the most sense for sound to be strong against solid types, like steel, rock, or ice. And then it should be weak against softer types, like water, ground, and flying, since flying is the representative type of air. That's actually a nice segue into our next type, that being wind, or air if that's what you prefer. Now, I will admit, this is never going to happen, but I still wanted to discuss it to bring attention to just how weird the flying type is. Whenever someone thinks about the elements of the world, they're pretty much always thinking about water, earth, fire, air. Everyone who's watched Avatar, not the blue people, I'm talking about the cartoon television series, which also happens to be the greatest TV show ever created, knows that. And all of those elements have one or more associated Pokemon type. Water and fire, obviously. Earth is rock, ground, and steel. And air is flying. The type intended for creatures that fly. That's the weird thing about the flying type. It simultaneously represents the physical act of flying, but also the element air. There are flying type attacks that deal with the activity or anatomy of flying, like fly or wing attack, or sometimes some bird-specific ones like peck. But then there are flying type attacks that deal with a control over the element air, like aeroblast, air slash, or gust. While they are clearly related, they are still two distinct things. I don't think it'd be far-fetched, pun very much intended, to have flying be the anatomical, activity, behavior-focused type, much like fighting, bug, or dragon, and then have a wind type, which is the more elemental type, like water or fire. As for which current Pokemon could become wind type, that's admittedly tricky. Pretty much all existing flying type Pokemon actually can fly, so therefore the flying type makes sense for them. However, there's quite a few Pokemon where both could make sense simultaneously, since they can both fly and control the wind, like Tornadus, and maybe some of the normal flying type Pokemon as well. I think there's a lot more potential for brand new Pokemon that would be wind type though, such as ones that have control over the air, but maybe don't fly in the traditional method of using wings. The moves that could change from flying to wind type are, like I mentioned before, the ones that deal with a control of the air rather than the physical act of flying. As for type matchups, I actually think the wind type would have very different matchups than flying, since all of the flying types matchups are based on bird behavior or factors that limit flight. If you want those explained to you, I recommend checking out this video of mine right here. But the wind type matchup would be based on what the wind itself can do to things. So maybe it'd be weak to steel and rock since hard structures usually block wind, but maybe it's strong against water since wind can churn up waves, ground due to wind erosion, or fire since wind blows out fire. But also can cause it to spread. And oxygen is a fuel for fire. This one could go either way. Like I said, there's no way this ever happens since they're too similar to justify a large split, but it's still fun to think about. The next type is another one that I came up with as a kid that many other people also came up with independently, that being the space type. However, while I called it the space type as a kid, I wouldn't call it that now since space could refer to just the area between two objects. Instead, I would call it, well, actually, I'm not really sure. It's hard to pick since there's a lot of really good words for having to do with outer space. There's cosmic, celestial, galactic, stellar, astral, alien, and probably several others I didn't think up. Let me know down in the comments below what you would call the space type, whether it's one of those words or something else. But for the rest of this video, I'm just gonna keep calling it the space type for simplicity's sake. This is another type that people have discussed for a pretty long time due to the large amount of Pokemon that could feasibly be space type, because they're from outer space, or another dimension. There's Deoxys, Cleffa, Clefairy, Clefable, LGM, Behem, Staryu, Starmie, and all of the Ultra Beasts. Probably some others that I missed as well. Oh, of course, Palkia. It's the space Pokemon. It would make a lot more sense for it to have the space type than the frickin' water type. I think having a specific type attributed to Pokemon not of this world makes a lot of sense, since it's a very prominent feature of their anatomy. We already have Pokemon types that are given a type based just on what type of animal they are, those being bug and dragon, so having a specific type for alien Pokemon would be very logical. Some moves that could be space type are ones that mention or have something to do with outer space. Cosmic Power, Meteor Mash, or Wish, because you're wishing upon a star. Type matchups are tricky for the space type. If the sound type existed, then space would most certainly be immune to it, since in space, no one can hear you scream. Sorry. If you focus on the alien aspect of the space type, then it's really hard to pick what it would be strong or weak against, since we don't really know the attributes of aliens because we don't know any real aliens. At least, as far as I'm aware. If you focus on the outer space aspect of it more, then I could see it resisting water and being strong against ice, since space is so cold that any water floating out in space would freeze, and any ice would like it more because it's really cold, so ice is gonna get stronger in the cold. Fire would also be resisted since fire needs fuel to burn, and maybe space would be weak to steel since metal spacecrafts tend to fare pretty well in space if they're designed properly. Before we go over the final type, I wanted to have a quick discussion of a type that didn't make the cut for this video since it doesn't make enough sense. And that type is the light type. Prior to Generation 6, a lot of people wanted there to be a light type to be the counterpart of dark type, which makes perfect sense. Light and dark are opposites. The light type could have to do with bright good-heartedness as opposed to the dark type's cruelty and evilness. But then we got the fairy type, which was primarily created to balance out the OP dragon type. And since that type is balancing out a type based on a mythological creature, it makes sense for the new type to also be based on a mythological creature, hence the name the fairy type. But this new fairy type also filled the role of the light type. It focuses on bright good-heartedness, has several attacks that have to do directly with light, like Dazzling Gleam, Moonlight, and Light of Ruin, and it's even super effective against dark type. In short, we're not gonna get a light type, and it doesn't make sense for us to get a light type, because that's what fairy is. The final type we'll be covering today is the digital type. As the name implies, this type would have to do with software or computers or technological interactions. And I really want this type because if we got it, then we could finally have Digi-Pokemon.
Ooh, you suck!
At first it may seem like the digital type is too similar to the electric type, but it's really not, since having electrical powers is not the same as having technological powers. Just think about Zebstrika. It is a zebra that generates lightning. It has no control over technology whatsoever, so it's an electric type and would not be a digital type. In fact, most of the Pokemon that I think could become digital type are not even electric types to begin with. The Porygon line would be by far the most obvious set of Pokemon to receive the digital type because they're made of computer code and have upgrades and discs and stuff like that. I honestly think the Porygon line was the main inspiration for anybody who thought that, hey, maybe there should be a digital type. But there are others that work too. Genesect could definitely be a digital type since it's covered in very fancy technology and even accepts drives into its gun. It's a computer bug. It's a computer bug. Silvally also accepts literal CD discs that change its type, and Rotom can possess appliances. They're both perfect fits as well. Moves that could become digital type would be Lock On, Conversion, Conversion 2, Reflect type, and Recycle. And maybe Flash Cannon too, since everybody knows what a flash drive is. As for type matchups, the currently in development Pokemon offshoot called Temtem has a digital type for their creatures, which was a big reason why I wanted to discuss it in this video. Their type chart shows that digital is weak to water and electric because water and electricity can damage appliances, but it's also weak to digital itself, likely as a representation of computer viruses or malware. Digital is strong against digital, obviously, I just said that, but it's also strong against their melee and mental types, which are their equivalents of the fighting and psychic types. The justification for this is probably that if you have a lot of powerful tech on your side, then punches or mind tricks aren't really gonna matter. You're just gonna kill them. I just really love the idea for this type because I think it has a lot of potential for some really cool Pokemon designs. A digital poison type computer virus Pokemon, a digital fire type firewall Pokemon, or a digital flying carrier pigeon / email Pokemon. I don't know. I think there's a lot of really cool options, and I'd honestly really like to see it. So there we have it. Those are some new types that could possibly show up in Sword and Shield. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to watch some more of my Pokemon content, I recommend this video here. All right, that's all I have for now. So till next time, fans, gotta catch them all.